Adobe has been the biggest vector of attack for the last 18 months or so, and this is what I'm going to talk about today. We released a quarterly report just a couple of days ago, and during our research we found that just about half of all exploits that we are currently seeing, so over the last months, is attacking Adobe Reader. So this is the PDF reader, and I do want to point out that though we talk mostly about Adobe Reader, all that I'm saying also applies to Adobe Acrobat, which is the paid version and is a bit more popular in corporate segment than home user segment. So we can see that when we combine the so-called PDF-Ka and PDF families together, we get about 50% of the exploits that we see in the first 3 months of this year. And it's definitely worth pointing out that the first Microsoft, the exploits for the first Microsoft vulnerability is less than 15%. So there is a huge gap between the popularity of attacking Adobe software and the Microsoft software from our telemetry. Flash penetration rate in consumer space is over 99%, but that's only applying to Flash 8 and below. The latest, only 97% or so of consumers are running the latest version of Flash, and I would like to point out that these are the latest publicly available, the amount of people who have Flash installed versus the amount of people who do not have the latest version. So that's really good. And also, do keep in mind that this is not just talking about Windows machines. This is talking about the entire ecosystem. However, when we look at the corporate market, the numbers slightly change. We see that, looking overall, we see a little bit less than 98% at the time of these statistics that corporate users were using Flash on their machine. However, looking at what percentage of them had the latest version of Flash, the picture dramatically changes with less than 75%. So we can really make a good conclusion saying that corporations are having a harder time running up-to-date Flash players than consumers. Adobe does not give out any statistics on the penetration rates of Adobe Reader / Acrobat. I don't know why, but from the data that we've been able to gather, it seems to be around, in the 80s. So let's take the average, about 85% of certainly Windows machines seem to be running Adobe Reader. And there are a number of problems with the Adobe Reader. For instance, the updater may only check for updates in that particular major release. What does that mean? That means if you are still running version 7 of Adobe Reader, and we are at version 9.3.2 right now, then the version 7 updater will say, you still have the latest version. So users think that they are fine. But when we look at this picture here, it says that the support for Adobe Reader ended at the end of last year. It's extremely likely that a lot of corporations are still running outdated Adobe Reader installations. And with the support for Adobe Reader 7 having ended, it means that these corporations are constantly vulnerable. Luckysploit, which has been a very popular exploit kit, decided to drop all of their exploits and only focus on Adobe Reader and Adobe Flash Player. And I found this is an extremely significant development, because that meant that for Luckysploit, which was one of the most popular exploit kits, this was absolutely enough to get the necessary infection rates. So they decided to simply drop their exploits for Microsoft vulnerabilities and focus on this. Another big problem is that the Reader, the Adobe Reader, is much more, it tries to do much more than the PDF specification actually says. What does that mean? It means that the bad guys can malform PDF files and try to confuse AV engines, while the Adobe Reader is still trying very hard to actually read these files. And that means that it's a lot of extra work for us, because we have to expand our engine and do more research than what really should be needed. So it's definitely an extra strain on us. And the market leader is slow to respond to the situation. As I said, there is a monoculture without real competition for either Flash or the Reader. So secondly, the Adobe Reader is a much bigger program. I mean, when you download the installer package for Adobe Flash, it's about 2 megabytes. The Adobe Reader is about 30. So there is a huge amount of extra code that can be found in the Adobe Reader. And not only that, Adobe Reader supports JavaScript, which is the absolute most favorite way for people to deliver exploits these days. So there is all this functionality in the Adobe Reader that can be very easily used by the cybercriminals to launch exploits and to try and evade detection even from AV solutions. The Flash updating problem seems to be more or less fixed. Adobe can simply ask major websites, please put in that the user needs to install the latest Flash player. Unfortunately, they cannot do this with the Adobe Reader. There is no way. But back in October, Adobe made the first efforts in improving that situation. And they released a so-called new updating infrastructure, which would enable auto-updates. So automatic updates that would automatically be silently installed, and people would just be notified, hey, we upgraded you to the latest version. However, they didn't turn it on. So effectively, it didn't do much. It didn't do anything. It was just a trial phase. And going to April 2010, there was a lot of noise from Adobe saying, we just turned on the auto-update mechanism. A lot of noise. But it didn't change anything. It's a big problem. Adobe makes a lot of noise about updating Reader, but they are not even asking users to enable automatic updates. The user has to manually go into the settings of the program and update and change the update settings. Programs which can be called directly from the browser, they need to check for updates on a daily basis. Monthly checking for updates on the monthly basis simply isn't enough. And ideally, these updaters are updating automatically. For instance, like the Google Chrome browser model, Google Chrome is updating totally automatically. The user doesn't even have a choice if he wants to install updates or not. It just happens. And if we really want to change the situation with the faulty updaters, that is what needs to happen. We see the vast majority of attacks right now on Adobe Reader. If Adobe wants to change that situation, there is no other way for them than to enable automatic updates.